Hello and welcome to the Politics at Sam and Anne's election special. Everything you need to know about the local elections taking place and those votes in Scotland and Wales in 1 month's time on May the 7th. It's a moment that could change the course of so many parts of the country and Westminster as a whole. I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Will Labour lose power in Wales for the first time ever? Could the SNP hold on to Scotland for an unprecedented and incredible fifth term in a row? And what does five-party politics look like when it hits the ballot box in England, with over 4,850 council seats across 134 of England's 317 councils going to the polls?
And most of all, what does it mean for our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, as he faces the sternest test since the general election? Might he, or Kemi Badenoch, his Tory counterpart, be facing the Ides of May for their leaderships?
Now, there's no better person to take us through a deep dive of everything than Rob Ford, Professor of Political Science at the University of Manchester. And we went through a tour of the nations and the regions with him. Rob, May the 7th is going to be a massive moment for our politics. Before we dive into individual nations, individual councils, from a helicopter view, can you just tell us, what are we looking for?
To my mind, there are a series of questions sort of in order of importance that I'm going to be using to sort of diagnose what we've learned from these local and devolved elections. The biggest question of all, given that we have a Labour government with a large majority, is what is the health of the Labour Party in the aftermath of these local and devolved elections. I mean, a lot of these elections are taking place in areas of current or historical strength for Labour. So this is a reasonable set of elections to look at in terms of assessing their strength. But the second question, which we wouldn't normally ask in local elections, but we have to ask given the state of the polling right now, is what is the health of our traditional two-party system? The Conservatives are also likely to go backwards very substantially in these local elections. That is highly unusual 2 years into opposition. Normally oppositions recover at this point. And that, of course, leads us on to our third question. If, as I expect will probably be the case, the answer to the first two questions is the health of the Labour Party is pretty dire, the health of the two-party system is pretty dire, who is benefiting most? Who is gaining most? Are reforms still topping the tree in terms of advances as they are in the polling? Are the Greens making big gains? Are the nationalists in Scotland and Wales making big gains? And are the Lib Dems, who've kind of been out of the discussion for a while, they have a lot of areas coming up where they can potentially be strong. So are they coming out of this set of local elections happy as well? So lots of questions to get into because this is multi-party politics now. There's an awful lot going on.
So something that's really interesting me about this, Rob, and I never decide in my own mind, is this really just like a kind of health check election? And then the parties will say, well, it's always bad. It's like the midterms in the US. Guess what? You get hit over the head with a bit of hammer from the electorate. But you seem to think it's much more structural than that whatever happens, whenever we're analysing this the day after, we'll be looking at something that is predictive about changes in UK politics. Or is that maybe just an argument that it could actually just turn out to be like, tell us what we know already?
I mean, these local elections are often a health check. I mean, they are real ballots in real boxes. So parties take them seriously. We should all take them seriously because, polls can be wrong. Polls have been wrong before. But this set looks very likely to be different because normally the health check that we're doing is the incumbent government versus the main opposition party. That has been the story of our politics ever since the Second World War, the swing backwards and forwards between Labour and the Conservatives. And of course, the Liberal Democrats and other parties have also done traditionally better in local elections. And of course, the Nationalists have done better in devolved elections. But that has always been the biggest headline coming out. But this time, possibly for the second year in a row. So important to remember, May 2025 was already a history-making election. It was the first set of local elections ever where not just one party, but two parties beat both Labour and the Conservatives in terms of seats gained. It was the first election ever since we started making national vote share projections where a party other than Labour or Conservatives came top on those projections. So we've already seen history made last year. And it looks very, very likely, given the state of the polling, that we're going to see history made again this year. Not just incidentally in the English locals, but also we are very likely to see history made in Wales as well, where for the first time in modern history, the Labour Party looks set to lose a nationwide poll in Wales. So this is a very different health check. This is no longer a health check about government versus opposition.
It's about this point that we start to get some expectation management from the political parties, Rob. I've already had Labour folk come out and say, well, we're going to lose 1,500 councillors on the night. It's always hard to sort of divide what's a realistic set of expectations from what's a sort of hedged attempt by the parties. Any rough metrics that would lead you to say, for instance, the governing Labour Party was having a bad night?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to be the person tasked with that expectation management job at the moment in either the Labour or the Conservatives parties, because if you're going to set the bar low enough that you can be confident of clearing it, you're setting it very, very low indeed, based on what we're seeing in the polling, also what we're seeing in local council by-elections, for example. I'm not really sure where my bar would be, because we don't have, normally one would set the bar based on history. One would say, if you lose 300 or 400 seats in the local council election at this point in a parliament, maybe you're doing okay or whatever it might be. But we can't use history as much of a yardstick in this set of local elections, because history doesn't feature a party like Reform UK top in the poll. It doesn't feature a party like the Greens battling it out for second place. There is no historical precedent for the polling environment we're in. And that makes it very hard. It almost makes it sort of misleading to start setting yardsticks about, is this good or bad for Labour? Because the nature of such yardsticks is they have to draw on the past. But we're in a different environment to the past.
Can I ask one more big picture question? Do you think this is a moment, that this is a set of elections where we get a sense of whether votes translate into seats? And what I mean by that is, you've got parties like the Greens and Reform polling really well, but the big question is whether or not they have the ground game and the vote distribution for them actually to be translated into wins.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually even split that question into two, Sam. I think the first question, you're absolutely right, particularly with younger, newer parties, particularly with Reform and the Greens, is do they have the ground game? Do they have the organisation? Do they have the data, the intelligence in order to figure out where they can win ward after ward after ward in areas of the country where, quite frankly, they've never really been at the races before? That will be a question that we get something of an answer to. But the other question we get is, who benefits from the electoral system and where in this situation? Normally, the electoral system has been the friend of the biggest two parties, but we don't really have biggest two parties consistently, city after city, region after region, going into these elections. Last year, first past the post was a tremendously big friend of Nigel Farage, provided an electoral springboard for him in the shires and the counties, in places like Leicestershire, Warwickshire, Nottinghamshire, Durham, and so on. He was bouncing up to 2/3 of the seats on 35% of the vote. Now, there are parts of the country where he could pull that trick off again. There are parts of the country where the Greens can pull that trick off. There are other parts of the country where a split Tory Reform vote maybe gives the Lib Dems a route to springboard into big numbers of seats. So we may well see volatility magnification. This could be a real sort of first past the post as an electoral chaos agent, particularly in England. And of course, the people of Scotland and Wales may look at all of this and perhaps be a little bit smug and say, well, look, see, our electoral system is a bit more sort of comprehensible and reliable in terms of sort of delivering seats that relate to the votes that are actually won, because their electoral systems are quite different to the local election systems used in England.
So take us on a tour then. Let's start north of the border. Obviously, Scotland, incredibly significant here, and particularly in the picture that we now have of Labour and that very awkward relationship. We've got the leader of Scottish Labour only a few weeks ago who was coming out saying, Anna Sawa, saying that he didn't think Keir Starmer should be leader at all. How are you reading the impact of that on the Scottish race?
Well, it's very clear in the polling and that Keir Starmer has not been going down well north of the border. And coming back to the question of expectations management, how the Scottish result looks is drastically different whether one takes 2024 as one's baseline or 2021, which is the last time the Scottish Parliament was up. Because if you look at the polling for Scottish Labour in particular, it's like looking at one of those alpine mountains. It's like sort of up and then straight down again. They get up almost up to or ahead of the SNP. People forget, like, Labour's performance was somewhat tepid in England and Wales in terms of vote share gains. It wasn't in Scotland. They made a really big advance in Scotland in July 2024, but all of that has now more or less, they've marched right up the hill and right back down again, back to where they were in 2021. So on a 2021 baseline, they may end up treading water. Scotland may actually end up being the least exciting election in terms of seats gained and lost. The SNP look to get roughly where they were before. Scottish Labour, another unimpressive performance. If you're Anna Sarwar, you really want eyes on 2021 as your yardstick for progress, because if the yardstick is 2024, it looks really bad.
And of course, 2024, you had the Tories to compete against and to say, do you want to get these people out? And there's a very strong feeling of that in large parts of Scotland. So you had a stick to beat with, and now you don't. Or if you apply it, then you apply it on Keir Starmer, and that brings you into the kind of situation you describe. I love the Alpine Mountain, by the way. I now have a vision of Keir Starmer skiing involuntarily, kind of on a very black run to possibly a very black fate. Sam, what do you reckon?
A lovely metaphor, but I want to know exactly what point on the mountain mattered. Rob, can you just sketch out? There clearly was a period where Anna Sarwar was doing very well, and he was on course to become the First Minister of Scotland. That is now not what the polling suggests. What was the crossover point? Take us to the blame game that will happen. Where will Labour end up in kind of on the leaderboard?
I'm just looking at the polling graphs as you were speaking, Sam, to get a precise answer to your question. And the answer to the question is, you can see exactly when the slope turns downward very steeply, and it's the summer of 2024. One can't say that it's Keir Starmer as a leader of the Labour Party, because he was presiding over a strong upward trajectory for several years before that. You can't say it's Anna Sarwar as a Scottish Labour leader, because he'd been in post for a long time. I think the very obvious prime candidate is Labour entering government, and the voters who had voted them in, particularly it seems in Scotland, not being particularly impressed with the first impression they made in that summer and autumn of 2024.
So we don't even need to get as far as the welfare rebellion, the have you really got a growth plan, which is where the parts of the commentariat, probably like myself, tend to focus. You think the disappointment there set in earlier?
Well, I mean, it's a continuous downward slope, so probably those things reinforced the pattern of decline. The counterfactual is that they managed those debates better, and maybe they arrest the decline, level off at a higher level, maybe even reverse it. But I think the other thing that highlights is the sort of one of the enduring paradoxes of devolution is that the whole point of devolution is supposed to be that politics becomes distinct in Scotland and Westminster and Wales and Westminster, that you've got a different government, you've got an SNP government running Scotland, and yet when you look at the polling trends, the biggest and most powerful polling trends in Scottish politics right now, the decline of the Labour Party, the rise of reform, those look to be Westminster driven polling trends. And ironically, because it's not really anything to do with anything they've said or done, the biggest beneficiaries from that are the SNP, who look like they might finally be facing some sort of trouble as a long-term incumbent, but now, once again, look likely to coast to another victory.
Right, well, let's look at another place where Reform are really hoping that they can make a great leap forward, and that is, of course, Wales. And there, also the fate of Welsh Labour very much in the balance. Do you think they're being unduly pessimistic, even in a sort of panic about a heartland, or is it a particularly special situation in Wales, complex voting system, even more so than in Scotland?
Welsh election specialists that I know have said that for quite a while, Welsh Labour has benefited from the weakness of its opponents. It's been almost like a great mansion with dry rot. The weather's been clement, so it looks like a solid structure, but when the wind blows, down it comes. What we're now seeing is Plaid emerging. Again, there's a Westminster trend to this. Welsh Labour voters, like Scottish Labour voters, like English Labour voters, are often quite disappointed with the performance of the government. And what's happened is that Plaid have managed to position themselves as a viable alternative on the same side of the political spectrum. Essentially, for a lot of Welsh Labour voters, they're saying we're the Labour Party you wished you had, and they've shot into a very commanding position in the polls. But at the same time, Reform have also advanced very strongly in Wales. So we're now in a situation where Labour coming third in a country where they haven't lost a nationwide election for a century looks like a racing certainty in Wales. It would be a massive upset. If we were to go back in a time machine 4 or 5 years and put that scenario to people, they would have thought it was crazy. So it's extraordinary, the decline in Welsh Labour. That will be the big story out of Wales, will be Labour's collapse. But there's also a second story, which is who then ends up coming out on top. Will it be Plaid or will it be Reform UK? Now, that question, I think, in terms of who gets the most seats in isolation is a little bit misleading, because even if Plaid comes second in terms of seats overall, the way that this new electoral system works, it's very likely that there'll be a progressive majority. Very, very difficult to get to a scenario where Reform plus Conservatives gives you a majority in the Senedd. So even if Plaid came second to Reform, they probably would still end up providing the First Minister.
So it's not quite the winner takes it all in Wales.
No, absolutely not. That's the wonder of proportional representation. If you are the more fragmented side, the reason Reform are in such an advantage in England is because they're basically Snow White facing 3 or 4 fragmented electoral dwarves on the left. So, and it being first past the post, you just win and win and win and win. You go from 30% votes to 60% seats. Under the Welsh system, 30% vote might get you 35, 36% seats. You get a little bit of a bonus for being big, but not a big bonus. It's not winner takes all, but winning is still good. Winning is still a big headline.
It's quite popular for a reason.
Yes.
To what extent do you see a long tail of the massive change in Welsh politics actually all stemming from Brexit? You have a nation there, a historic Labour nation that voted for Brexit back in 2016. You then saw it sort of go through lots of different permutations. It sort of there were some general elections where there were quite a lot of Tories being elected. You've seen the creeping increase in the popularity of Reform. Was it that 2016 vote that started to sort of uncleave the bits of the Labour coalition, do you think? Or do you put it down to something else?
No, I think Brexit is a big part of the story in Wales. Wales, of course, unlike Scotland, did vote Leave, and Leave did very well, for example, in the sort of traditional white working class Welsh Valley, some of the most solidly Labour places in the country hitherto. And there's an analogy I've been using for Labour elsewhere, which I think is particularly appropriate in a country so full of valleys, which is the valley of electoral death. So the problem that Labour have post-Brexit, particularly in a place like Wales, is they fall into a valley of electoral death where they're just nobody's first choice anymore. They haven't been able to renew their appeal to the traditional working class Leave voters that have been such a focus of the party strategically. The hero voters in Wales are not going over to Labour. They're going over to Reform. We can see that. But on the other hand, the sort of progressive, young, socially liberal Remain voters that have actually been the largest part of Labour's base for most elections in the last 15 years or so, they've been alienated by this process. And in Wales, they have a sort of ready-made, oven-ready alternative party available for them to vote for in the form of Plaid Cymru. So they've gone over to Plaid Cymru wholesale. So Labour's gone from being acceptable to everybody to being nobody's first choice, with everybody having a better first choice alternative in a very short period of time.
So England. Now, Rob, we need you to try and make something simple out of a pretty complex picture here. How should we read the challenges in England? And can you provide us with a sort of easy taxonomy that we could maybe follow through to election night of what kinds of seats are up for grabs here, what kind of voters?
So this year, there's the 3 biggest sort of categories of places that I think it's worth focusing on and talking about. The first is London's borough elections, all 32 London boroughs. Now, London kind of does its own thing, quite different to most of the rest of England, in that all London's councillors get elected simultaneously once every 4 years in wards where you get 3 councillors per seat. So instead of it being first past the post, it's first 3 past the post, so to speak. Then you've got the big metro areas like London, a lot of the big cities. Many of them do elections sort of 1/3 every 3 years, but a bunch of them this year got boundary changes, which means they're also electing all of their councillors all at once. And obviously they're big cities, they have a particular kind of politics. A lot of places that are both ends of that Labour coalition are on display in those big cities. You've got the kind of diverse, young, liberal, Remainy big cities, but you've also got some of the larger towns and smaller cities where it's much more red wall, quote unquote, much more Labour leave and so on. So that's the metros outside of London. And then the third thing is the shires and the districts and the smaller places dotted up and down England. We actually have a number of shire elections this year, which we wouldn't normally because of the government moving the calendar around on various things. There was a bunch of places that got postponed, and they were going to get postponed again, and then they got unpostponed, so they're now back on the electoral calendar.
Okay, take us to something. What do you think is the most striking? What should we go to first when we're looking at the English part of this picture? What's the most exciting politically from your point of view?
This year, we could really see some quite seismic changes in London. We could see a number of inner London boroughs go over to the Greens, or either go over wholesale to a Green majority or to a sort of hung council, but with the Greens as the largest party. There is no precedent for that at all in local elections history. And of course, given what happened up here where I am in Manchester not so long ago, this would be a huge story in terms of, Zachmentum, in terms of the Green Party continuing to advance. But at the same time, reform, if you look at the outer fringe of London, you see places where UKIP did well once upon a time, where even the BNP did well once upon a time, and Reform would really like to get a decent cohort of London councillors installed in those outer London boroughs to show that they can reach places all over the country, that the capital is not out of their reach and so on. But then there are also places that are very, very strong for the Lib Dems in London, and they'll be hoping to capitalise on trouble for the bigger two parties. And there are places where, because of some peculiarities of the Conservative vote in the past few years, the Tories may well do better than they have been doing. So there's at least four parties with a big stake in what's going on in the capital.
Should we pivot to some of the other metropolitans? Because London isn't the only big city up for election. On Sky recently, we had a particularly bleak picture of what was going on in Britain's second city, Birmingham, with the now we're in bin strikes in their second year. We've had the council leader being challenged and having votes of no confidence. You've got a council in special measures. You've got challenges from independents. What could we learn from all of that?
Birmingham is likely to be a really chaotic result. I think one of the local elections experts, I'm a big fan of, Tony Travers, he recently coined, I heard him use the term super knock, super no overall control, to describe what may happen in places like Birmingham, possibly Croydon in London too, where it's like not even, you're having to piece together coalitions that involve several different moving parts, parties that aren't used to working together. And when you've got the kind of grave challenges that a place like Birmingham faces, that's going to be a really, really difficult problem. I mean, I tend to focus about these things, in terms of elections, public opinion and so on, but this also determines who governs an area afterwards. And if you've got a very fragmented council with a lot of very populist figures elected onto it, it becomes a real challenge, like actually doing the difficult things that a place like Birmingham's got to do. In terms of the broader story on the metros, again, it's basically the story of the populist challenges is going to be the big one here. There's a number of places where the Greens have got some very good opportunities, but Sheffield is up, Leeds is up. They've got some strength in there. They've got surprising strength in some of the northeast cities as well, which are up. And then when you look at the smaller cities and towns, I'm thinking places like Barnsley, Bolton, so on. Reform are going to be the big story. The other worry for Labour, aside from what happens in London, is do you get big chunks of red terrain going turquoise basically overnight? Because that's a party management nightmare in that situation, because you've got one set of MPs and councillors panicking about a Green challenge and another set of MPs and councillors in a different part of England panicking about a Reform challenge.
Can I just ask how you're seeing the battle in the shires between the Lib Dems and Tories? It was formerly, that was quite a classic. That menu may have changed now from that prefix to something more a la carte. But we haven't really mentioned the Tories in a lot of detail here. Are you seeing any hopes for them coming to fruition? I mean, they look a bit more healthy in the polls, albeit at under 20%, but a bit healthier for Kemi Badenoch than they were. And then, the Lib Dems caught in a green vice, or can they still find a way to have some success out of this?
Yeah, the shires are the other big subplot in this Netflix mega series of local elections, elections with many different subplots. Some of the shires should have been up last year. Essex, Norfolk, Suffolk, Hampshire, East and West Sussex. Those are all on the agenda this year. County council elections, they'd normally have taken place last year, I think. They all got postponed. Those are all very blue because those were all previously elected in 2021, which was an exceptionally strong year for the Conservatives. One of the challenges I find with trying to benchmark and explain local elections changes is what's happened in the polls in the last few months can be one story, particularly at the moment, and where the polls are now versus when these places last elected councillors can be a very different story. So the big problem for the Conservatives is 2021. That was the vaccine bounce. Feels like a whole different world now. Boris Johnson riding high, giant toads squatting in the centre ground of politics, 2 terms coming and so on. So it's an enormous crash from there to where they are in the polls now, even if actually they've picked up a bit or at least stabilised in recent months. So there's a very good chance that they will lose an awful lot of councillors in those places, just like they did last year.
Can I push you, Rob? If we're looking for metrics against which to judge the Tories, if the Tories are doing well, where might they do well on May the 7th? If the Tories are doing less well, how would we know?
The question with the Tories is slightly different to the question with Labour, because with Labour, how big a hit do you take for being in government? The question for the Tories, which is a unique question really for an opposition this far in opposing an unpopular government, is where is their floor going to be? When are they going to stop falling and start the process of recovery if it's going to happen? So I think in terms of geography, I would be looking to the kinds of places where we know the Tories won Westminster seats last time and where we know from demographics that the remaining vote is more Conservative friendly versus Reform friendly. The mix of voters is just more core Conservative. So some of the wealthier bits of London fall into that category. Some of the wealthier bits of suburbia around London probably fall into that category too. So I'd be looking to see how well they hold on in places like that. The second metric I'll be using is what share of their incumbent seats do they manage to hold on to. Now that figure is going to be, I suspect, pretty grim unless we have a very big surprise on election night. Like last time they lost, May 2025, they lost more than 2/3 of their council seats that were up. First sign of maybe green shoots would be if more incumbents hold on. If, say, they hold on to 40%, 45%, something like that. Now, that's a paradoxical thing because they're still losing more than half of their councillors. That doesn't look like a great result, but it means the loss rate has gone down. They're sort of starting to stem the bleeding. They're still bleeding, but the flow of blood is reduced.
In order to wrap this up, I was going to ask you a bit of a thumb-sucky question, Rob. On May the 7th, we're electing local councils, but in truth, the kind of way that we're doing government these days is moving away from local government. We have increasing numbers of metro mayors that are sucking up some of the powers and some of the budgets. And if we're being honest, local councils aren't what they were. They have to follow the instructions that central government tell them. They have to. Large parts of their budgets are adult social care, special educational needs. Being a councillor doesn't come with the powers and doesn't come with the budgets that it once did. Does local council life, do local councils matter in the way that they did 10, 20, 30 years ago?
I would both say no, they don't. And also they should have mattered more 20 or 30 years ago than they did then as well. We live in one of the most centralised societies on earth in terms of the balance of powers between central and local government. And I think that brings problems both in terms of the quality of governance that people get out of their local councils, but also because of a mismatch between their expectations of local councils and what local councils can deliver. And I also think it brings another problem, which probably wasn't evident 20 or 30 years ago, but really is evident today. One of my favourite academic quotes is an American political scientist, V.O. Key, who said, "It is my unpopular proposition that voters are not fools." I think voters are not fools when it comes to local councils. They recognise that these councils don't have the powers that they had, don't have the powers that they should. And so they treat these elections as a kind of a free hit, as an experiment, as an opportunity to protest and stuff like that. That adds instability into the system. I do think this is a health check, not just on the party system, but on the relative powers of our different branches of government in England, and perhaps a sign that we need to look at local government again and perhaps redress that imbalance.
Sam Coates is our resident intellectual, so he was asking a thumb-sucky question. I'm all about the pub quiz element of this, which is where I hope we will all be the day or so after these elections taking stock. Have you got any sort of pub quiz questions you're going to be trying to answer for yourself as you go into this manic couple of days when we get there?
And 2 pub quiz questions I'll be combing through the results files to see if I can get new answers to are, firstly, what's the lowest share of the vote that a councillor gets elected with? Because with politics now being so fragmented, those figures keep going down. I think there was a councillor elected in Cornwall with under a fifth of the vote, 17% of the vote, something like that, last year. Maybe that record gets broken. And then similarly, what's the lowest vote share that a party achieves sufficient to get a majority on a council? Could you get a majority on a council majority of seats on 25, 26, 27% of the vote because of, again, this sort of springboard effect from first past the post? So that's going to be really interesting to watch because our electoral system is playing a bigger role than ever.
Sounds like a great pub quiz. But the trouble is I think you might win it even before anyone else got going.
Oh God, no! I'm not going up against Rob Ford in a nerdery competition on the local elections. No way. Even if I hope to share a drink with you after this is all done. Rob, thank you so much for sharing all of that with you. A proper deep dive look into the local elections. We look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure.
So much coming up on May the 7th and the aftermath. So we will have a special debrief edition, as we always do after elections, on the morning of Friday, May the 8th, to analyse the opening results and take you through all the twists and the turns afterwards.
And just so you know, the counting after the polls close on May the 7th will take about 3 days. So at the time of recording, and these things change, particularly as you get closer to polling day, 42 English councils will count overnight on the Thursday, 77 will count on the Friday, and 5 will count on the Saturday. But all the counting for the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Parliament elections will begin at 9 a.m. on the Friday. So you'll get declaration times for the seats, and you'll know the overall results for Scotland and Wales mid to late afternoon. So stay tuned for all of that as well.
We're girding our loins for that marathon, but that's it from us for the moment. It's Easter break for the rest of the week. So we will be back in your feeds next Monday as normal, and see you then.